Welcome to the Plant Centered and Thriving podcast. I'm your host, Ashley Kitchens. Welcome to the show. My name is Ashley, and I am so grateful you are here today. I hope you're having a wonderful new year. So I don't know, depending on how long you have been around, we started this podcast about a year and a half, 2 years ago now. And one of the main reasons I wanted to start this podcast is I heard a fact. I guess I could call it a fact, a saying. I don't know what it is, but I wanted to share it with you. And this is what it is. Stories are remembered up to 22 more times than facts alone. And this comes from the women's leadership at Stanford University. When people think of advocating for their ideas, they think of convincing arguments based on data, facts, and figures. However, studies show that if you share a story, people are often more likely to be persuaded. I heard that a long time ago, and I remember thinking to myself, wow, what if we created a podcast that shared people's stories and how they went plant-based or why they went plant-based, like what that journey looked like for them? And I thought about that for years, y'all. And then finally, it came to a point where I was like, I can't keep thinking about this. I need to do it. So that is a big reason why this podcast was created, is to share, to give other people who have been plant-based or vegan a platform to share their stories. And so people like yourself, whether you're thinking about going plant-based, whether you're new to plant-based, or whether you've been plant-based for a really long time, to empower you to continue your journey, to start your journey, to embrace this journey that a lot of us were kind of hesitant to embrace. It was a little scary because most of us, and I'm sure you're similar to myself in that you weren't raised plant-based. You were probably raised on the standard American diet or meat and potatoes. And so going plant-based it's different. It's not normal. It can be challenging. There can be judgments from other people. There can be pushback. But when you get really clear on why you want to go plant-based, why you're doing this, then not only does that make it easier to start, but it makes it easier to stay plant-based. So speaking of stories, I have another one for you. I'm bringing Beth on the show. She is a mom of two and founder of Trifecta Pilates, using an empowered, effective, and joy-filled approach to working out. So you can see why I want to have her on the show, right? I love the joy-filled approach to working out. As a cancer survivor and health coach, she knows that it's about healthy habits that are simple, sustainable, and personal. Being raised in an environment where working out and, quote, healthy eating weren't the norm, Beth made conscious shifts in her personal health lifestyle without sacrificing pleasure. After a failed attempt at going plant-based, which she talks all about, years later, she tried again, focusing on finding recipes she enjoyed and thinking of it as an adventure. Beth uses a realistic and holistic approach to wellness through the pillars of Pilates, fitness, fuel, and fun. When she's not on her Pilates mat, you can find her reading a good book, hiking, or baking a sweet treat, vegan style, of course. I also want to promote Beth's YouTube. She recently surpassed, I shouldn't say recently, this is several months ago, she surpassed 100,000 YouTube followers. So I highly recommend checking that out. Of course, we're going to have all the links in the show notes. And at the end, she's going to share where you can find her and the best ways to reach out to connect with her. So please join me in welcoming Beth to the show. Welcome to the show, Beth.
Thank you so much for having me, Ashley. I'm thrilled to be here.
I am thrilled you are here. So before we get into your plant-based journey, I would love for you to share a little bit about who you are and what you do with our listener.
Yes, my name's Beth. I am in Colorado and I'm a Pilates teacher who really teaches holistically. So through Pilates workouts, home-based Pilates workouts, and I've also extended the system to include wellness and lifestyle based upon Joseph Pilates' book, Return to Life. And I really like to work with people where they are right here and now. So many people come to Pilates for an effective workout. So we get started there. And for some people, that's where they stay. But once people start getting into understanding the overall method, the interconnection between fuel, nutrition being a major component of that, plant-based for me personally is a large aspect, and how that can positively impact overall wellness and workouts. And then also pleasure, having fun and enjoying life, which actually, when we think about like the plant-based journey, is a major pause or hesitation for so many people, just because it seems like there's so many traditions, whether it's holiday traditions or birthdays or weddings or just even our everyday recipes that aren't plant-based. It can kind of feel like, this isn't going to be an enjoyable process. And I really center, let's have fun along the way as we're exploring and trying new things, whether it's workouts or another aspect of wellness.
Mm, that's such a beautiful approach, and it's such a approachable approach for those wanting to get into Pilates and kind of using that plant-based example as a way to overlap that into Pilates. How did you actually get into Pilates?
Yes, well, many years ago, it was back in early 2000s. I was in college and I actually didn't even know I was doing Pilates because at the time, not a lot of Pilates studios or people who taught Pilates could say they could teach Pilates. That's a story for another day. But I just really enjoyed it. And part of the reason why I enjoyed it was because about a year before I got into Pilates, I had cancer and it was very challenging to navigate. I had to drop out of college at the time for a semester, really decreased my overall fitness and wellness during that point in time. And it took me some time to recover, and it allowed me to have a really challenging workout on days when I had that energy. And on days that I didn't, I could do a much more restorative, soothing movement session, slower paced. And that was really valuable. So I could still feel like I was moving and not just doing the really challenging work or nothing at all. So it was extremely flexible in that way, not just like flexible for the body.
Yes, I like that. Yep, absolutely. And I know that I kind of wanted to make sure that we got into this, but what was that? Because I shared it with, or I will share it with the listener in your introduction, but what was that like being diagnosed, especially at such a young age in college
Mm,
with cancer and having to drop out and go through all of that? What was that like?
not fun. That was not a pleasurable experience. And it was interesting because even at the time, my family said to me, and I was in the hospital, and my whole family was there. I said, but Beth, you are the healthiest one out of all of us. You're the one who works out and eats well. I was not plant-based at the time and eats well. Like, how did you get cancer? And sometimes no matter what we do from our lifestyle activities can't counter genetics or the environment or whatever else is going on. So it was fast. There's some cancers where it's, oh, well, in a month we'll start treatment. Mine was, I was having symptoms July 20th. I was diagnosed, and on July 4th, so I'm rewinding a bit, July 4th in 1999, went on this amazing rollerblade ride with my boyfriend at the time. And I'm not a rollerblader. I completely fell down like really hard, did not have one bruise. And by the time of diagnosis, less than just a couple weeks later, I had bruises all over my entire body. I was fatigued. I was sleeping a lot. And so it was a big shock. And I had a bone marrow biopsy to diagnose me, went immediately into the hospital because I was not stopping bleeding from that because of the leukemia. And then like the next day, transferred to another hospital to start treatment. So it was a whirlwind. And it was like after
Yeah,
a week, I finally asked my mom, can you like bring me some clothes? I just don't want to wear the hospital gown anymore.
I
I'm
bet
gonna be
not.
here for like another month.
Well, I appreciate you highlighting that point of like at the time you were doing the best that you had access to that you knew. And I think that's important for a lot of people to recognize that there are still factors at play that like genetics, like the environment, where there are things that happen that are out of your control. So I appreciate you even highlighting that, like you were the healthiest person everyone knew, but yet you still got cancer. So I appreciate you being vulnerable about that as well. So how did
You.
things kind of go from there? You're in your young 20s, I would assume, maybe early teen or late teens, and you have this diagnosis, you're going through treatment, and then what kind of plays on after that?
Yeah. So, I had questions like, what should we eat? Like, what are the workouts? And they didn't really have a lot of specific advice. And so I kind of just went back to my former way of eating once I could tolerate food again. but I said to myself, I'm going to do everything in my power to be as healthy as I can, feel good, and also enjoy life. Like, this isn't about deprivation. That's really an essential component. I think a lot of times people even think that with like plant-based, like, oh my gosh, how do you deprive yourself? It's like, we could not sustain this if we didn't actually enjoy what we were doing. But I had always said, if I ever have cancer again, I'm going to be vegan. And
Ah,
like, why would I wait till I have cancer again? I don't know why I thought that. Like, why wouldn't it make that change sooner? And so I read a book called, I forget what this actual book was called, but it was about animal rights. And for about a week, I went plant-based and I just completely stopped. This was about 2012. Like, it just wasn't sustainable for me at the time. I wasn't in the right mindset. The yogurt was horrible back then, the vegan
yes.
yogurt. But I didn't think, well, let's just try a recipe a month, a plant-based recipe a month, and start incorporating those. It just was like complete, you do it or you don't. That was my mindset. And then it was years later, about 2016. So this is many years between cancer and then going vegan. But I was in the process of grieving my father, who had died many years prior. My kids were doing cute kid stuff, and I knew that he would just love like all their little antics. And I thought, this just, I really wish he was here right now.
Mm.
And if there's anything in my power I can do to stay here longer and also have fun, because he was an advocate, like, just laugh and have fun, then I should be doing that. And at the same time, I was reading the book, the China Study,
Oh,
and it
yes.
just clicked. Like, this is so, why am I waiting to have cancer again? I didn't have kids and it was incredibly challenging. Now I have kids, and maybe in the future when my kids are much, much older, maybe they want kids and I'll have grandkids. Why would I wait till I have cancer again to go plant-based? Well, I have a degree in health education. I teach Pilates. I'm about prevention and proaction, not taking reactive measures. And so it was just an absolute easy shift. But there still was, people were like, whoa, what are you doing? Why are you doing this? You're just not enjoying life. I'm like, oh no, I'm finding really great recipes. The hardest aspect probably was baking, because I really do enjoy baking. But once you figure it out, there's that learning curve. Then it's like, your go-to substitutions and swaps, and it just becomes so much easier.
Yeah, yeah. Well, so what made it easier the second time around? 2012, it didn't work out. You kind of had that all or nothing mindset going into it. And then
Mhm.
2016, like, what do you kind of attribute to it? 2016 just feeling, it sounds like just more aligned, feeling better, easier.
Yeah, it was just all those pieces clicked of, I can find foods that I enjoy and recipes I enjoy. And one of the major things that clicked was, and this goes into an interview that you did with Corinne, where he was saying that if you go to a restaurant, it's like just all the same stuff over and over again. And I had this like light bulb, like, I'm literally just making the same food over and over again. Why don't I just add some variety and think of this as an exploration of trying new things, rather than thinking it's going to be exactly like was in the past? And what I also started tapping into was, do I actually enjoy this? Like, am I
Mhm.
really enjoying this? More that intuitive eating. Not only am I looking forward to eating it, how am I feeling during, how am I feeling after? And all those aspects need to be in alignment, along with, I'm going to do everything I can to stay here as long as I possibly can and feel good for as long as possible. And for me, that plant-based journey really is a big difference. I started noticing just a difference in how I feel. I'm not about weight loss, but I did automatically just lose some weight. Um, and it became easier to cook, actually. That's
Yes.
something I didn't realize at the time. At first, I was like, I don't know any of these recipes. What do you do with this tofu? It just, but now, so my kids are kind of leaning towards more plant-based, vegan. One's vegetarian, one is limited other animal proteins. But when I do have to cook them a chicken, because I still will do that, like a chicken breast, I'm like, this is such a pain. I have to
Yeah.
defrost it. I have to sanitize everything. Like, it's so much easier with
Yep.
the tofu that just lasts an incredibly long time in the fridge. It's right there. I don't have to defrost it. It's really convenient to get at the store. And my husband, who for a long time was like, no, Beth, I'm not going to do that. Like there's some tofu recipes now that he just loves. Like, are you making the lemon tofu? Oh, are you making the bacon tofu? It's like, like those are his two
Nice.
favorites. And so when we individually make changes that are in alignment, it trickles it into other people as well who are closest to us. And that's has been pretty fun to see through the years.
Yes. Oh, absolutely. And I want to unpack that a little bit more because, but going back to something that you said, it's amazing because a lot of us grew up eating the standard American diet, meat, potatoes, this pretty much the same meats rotated, same like 4 meats rotated every week. And similar to you, it wasn't until I went plant-based, it's like, wow, I'm getting so much more variety into my diet than I ever thought possible. I feel like kind of like what you're saying, it just opens up your eyes to what's at the supermarket and all these options that are out there, which is pretty abundant.
It really is. And I think one of my favorite things is when I go to a potluck and I bring something and people don't even realize it's plant-based. So my former career, which was assistant director at a health center, I, while I was there, I transitioned to plant-based. There are some people who came after I had transitioned, and it was like years that they were working there. And finally they said, oh, you don't eat any meat, any animal products? I said, no, I had no idea. It's like, right, because you enjoy what I bring to the potluck, you take it, and hopefully then you inspires them to have one more recipe that they make that's not plant-based
Yes. Yeah.
or that is plant-based and not animal-based.
Yep, absolutely. It's funny, I just had someone on, her name is Donine, who was talking about the same thing. They're a family of 4 and they don't go around saying, "Oh yeah, we're vegan, we're plant-based," kind of shoving it in people's faces because one of the reasons they went plant-based was because 2 of their friends were vegetarian and they had no idea. And they were like, "Wait, you're vegetarian?" And so I was like, and so that kind of piqued their interest. And it sounds like similar to you. It's not like you're in people's faces going, you have to do this. This is what everyone needs to be doing, but you're leading by example and people see that. And then they also eat your delicious food and they're like, wait a second, you're plant-based. So I think that's really neat.
Probably my biggest pet peeve is when people who know that I am plant-based and they eat something like, this is actually really good.
Yes.
Like, can you just edit the word actually
Yep.
for me?
Yes,
Because
exactly.
that's like you were thinking it was not going to be good.
Yep. Yeah. Well, so how was that? I want to talk about you first, and I want to definitely talk about your family too as you transitioned. Back in 2016, when you started transitioning, what were maybe some struggles that you faced as you were just finding different foods to eat and going grocery shopping, interacting with other people? How did that go?
Probably the biggest struggle at the time was for my husband, because at that time I was working full time and I didn't get home till 6. So my husband many nights would do the cooking, and he all of a sudden felt like he had to cook like for our kids and then for me, because it was always, I've always been, this is my decision. My kids were much older when they went plant-based. If they want to try it, that's great. If they don't, I'm not going to force it upon them. I want them to come to it when it makes sense for them. Now, they have obviously are eating more plant-based because I'm cooking more plant-based. And over the years, I've seen that transition. So that was really stressful. And finally, I was like, just ignore me. If I can cook and make a recipe on the weekends or a quicker meal when I come home, that's great. Otherwise, I'll find leftovers or I'll do something a little bit different. So that was incredibly challenging, I would say, for our relationship, but that was a little bit unique and somewhat temporary. And then it was years later that I forget which documentary my husband watched. He goes, okay, I'm going to try going plant-based for a month
Oh,
and see how it's working, because there's a lot of myths with plant-based, and his friends like kind of fed into those myths, and it's like, why don't you just watch this documentary and see? And it's like, oh my gosh. And it was specifically around more like sports and athletic performance, really debunking myths with that. So it helped encourage him to try plant-based.
yeah. Are you talking about the Game Changers documentary? possibly.
Maybe.
Yeah, that one definitely highlights athletic performance with being plant-based, and I think, like you're talking for a lot of men, it's really helpful. It just reaffirms that, "Oh, okay, well, I don't have to eat meat to have muscle, or I don't have to eat meat to be, quote, masculine." And so I think that's, I think, again, just kind of reaffirming, like you said, some of these, or it's debunking some of these stereotypes that we have out there when it comes to not eating meat or eating soy or those different types of things.
Yeah, and that soy one in particular is one of like big concerns I've found for men. And now it's really helpful, whether it's a short podcast or a documentary, or they read a book, depending upon, how someone likes to engage, just to plant that seed, like, well, actually, that's not the accurate research-based information that we know.
Yeah.
So it's not just, well, Beth said, it's like, no, let's take it back to the research.
Yep, absolutely. So when you were starting this transition, you said your weight kind of naturally shifted. What were some other things that you noticed, whether it was like Pilates related or some other like benefits that you noticed as you started transitioning to eating more
Yeah.
plants?
Well, I've always gotten the question, like, is there a specific Pilates diet? There's not. It's like overall just healthy eating as one of the pillars of Pilates. But every teacher kind of has their own, relationship with that. So I wouldn't say it really enhanced my performance in any way. I just felt better, and I'll talk about it. Like, my poop became better too,
Yep.
like so much better. It's just like I'm still like in and out of the bathroom. Like, why are people taking so long in the bathroom?
Yes.
Like, gosh, y'all, like it should not be that long.
Nope.
That might be an indicator, but it's so standard because we grew up that way that we don't realize that that's actually a signal, if you're in there for an extended period of time, that that's not beneficial for us.
Yeah.
That's actually a big signal, like, oh, something's a little bit wonky. Let's evaluate that.
Yeah. Yep. So you notice a big difference in your digestive system. Performance was like about the
Yes.
same, but I would imagine you said
Yes.
that you felt overall better. So I'm sure that helped.
Hmm. And then most recently, I had a doctor's appointment, and she was reviewing all of my blood work and cholesterol levels. And she's like, oh my gosh, your cholesterol is so incredibly low. It's like you're taking medication, it's so low. And I thought, isn't that interesting that that's how it was framed? Your cholesterol is so low, it's like you're taking medication.
Yeah.
Like, that's the frame of reference. And this isn't genetics. Both of my parents have higher cholesterol, whether it's genetics or, I'm assuming at this point, more from just what they ate, which is the standard American diet. Like, there was nothing like really bad in the way that they ate. It's just standard American diet. And so I don't want to be on medication if I can mitigate it. There's definitely a time and place for medication. That's the thing.
Yeah.
Sometimes we get this like no medication ever. It's like, hey, I wouldn't be alive if I didn't have medical treatment and
Right.
intervention and really relied on that. But at the same time, I know that's not where I want to be for my everyday. If there's anything I can do to avoid it. And for me, a big influence is not only working out consistently, whether it's with your CrossFit that you do, or me, it's Pilates based, and also nutrition is a major component of that. That's going to help us in the immediate and also set us up for success in the future.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Because you are so heavily into Pilates, and by the way, your YouTube channel is incredible. So we're definitely going to put that in the
Thank
show
you.
notes. Yeah. And congratulations on your milestone and everything there. Happy dance. Um,
Yes.
do you get many questions, Beth, about like, well, where do you get your protein? Because you can do Pilates, you're strong. Do you get many questions about that when people do find out that you're plant-based or don't eat any meat?
I don't get too many questions. I think because there is more information about it. People who tend to are like considering going plant-based and who are closest to me in the membership or just personally, they've kind of already like been digging and doing their own research. And I'm also not like setting myself up like, you need to follow this specific diet. And then when I say diet, I always mean it like our everyday eating, not like what we typically think of diet. So you need to follow this specific diet to do Pilates. or you should do this. So I don't get a lot of that. The question I get a lot though from people who, I don't know if it's just, it must be people who I know, but they ask me a lot about my beliefs of hunting.
Ah.
um, and and so we have a conversation about like hunting versus like the mass farms and where I stand on that, but not so much the individual like nutrients. There maybe is a little bit more concern about like bone density and bone health because we've been fed the myth like drink your milk for strong bones. So that piece, and if it's only one aspect that we're holding up as the one thing to help with bone density and bone health, well, we just know it's more well-rounded than that with
Mhm.
what we take in.
Yes, yes. And we're not getting I mean, we are getting calcium from cow's milk, but we're not drinking cow's milk for calcium. There's so many different foods out there, a lot of plant-based foods out there that are loaded with calcium or vitamin D where you don't need to drink cow's milk. Like a lot of us grew up thinking that that's why we had to drink it in the 90s and early 2000s where that was very an important part of growing up.
It was. I mean, we had like this pictures of like the mustache,
My
like that was
gosh,
like
yes.
the advertising campaign
Yep.
at the time with like celebrities.
Absolutely. Yes. In being diagnosed with cancer when you were in college, how has that been since then? Are you cancer free, in remission? What does that look like for
Gotcha.
you? Yeah.
Yes. So it depends upon the individual cancer. I was after my first round of treatment considered cancer free. So I did 1 month of intensive inpatient treatment. And then so my normal question was like, well, why do I have to come back for the next 2 rounds? Like I'm
Yeah.
done, right? And they said, oh no, studies show that if you just stop here, that's lying dormant somewhere in the body and it's going to come back. So I did 2 more rounds. And then after, so it's total of 3 months in the hospital with some space in between. And then after that, I did 2 years of maintenance treatment, which was part of the contributing factor of why I had some like really great days, and other times it was like, no, like I'm just gonna do something really a little bit more relaxed.
Yeah.
Then it's the 5 year mark is when for my cancer it's like, okay, your chances of getting it again are basically like anyone else. However, interestingly enough, that's not what like insurance companies count. So like I counted like my 5 year mark, I'm good, I can go get that insurance. So I have life insurance, but I had to wait like another 2 years or something like that because they counted it from the very end of my last pill that I took underneath that 2 year maintenance treatment. So it was just
Mm,
it was rather interesting how insurance does that and
yes.
unfortunate.
Hmm.
But now my risk for that particular cancer is just like anyone else's, which is really valuable, but it's still like it can still come back, that fear and concern if I'm noticing things are a little bit off. Now, the further away someone gets from their cancer treatment, I feel like that goes away somewhat. Yet there's like it was still an influence for me to go plant-based. Like
Yeah.
I don't want to be back there again. And I also knew because so I was 20 when I had cancer. I didn't have kids. I wasn't married. I could be incredibly selfish at the time. Like I didn't have to go back to work right away. When I started back at school, I started with a very easy load with school, very minimal work hours as well. And that recovery took an incredibly long amount of time, but I was very strong going in to cancer. I was physically healthy. I was doing my weight training. I'm still doing weight training now, but it like I couldn't like they had to threaten me. Okay, if you don't take a shower today, we're going to give you a sponge bath. If you don't get up out of
Wow.
this bed, like that's
Yeah.
how fatigued it was. And I don't want to be back there again. I
Yeah.
like to feel good in my body and move through life on my terms and not be like, you have to get out of bed. If you don't, you're going to get a sponge bath today. And food is a major component of that. Workouts, it really, I mean, they're the two big players, but they're not obviously the only aspects of how we are functioning. I think about, for instance, I have really started tapping into my sleep cycles because I tend to be a night owl, meaning that I can stay up incredibly late. And I feel good doing that. But the next day, my energy's low. It impacts my workouts. It impacts what I feel like eating the next day. And so, even though there's all these different individual components of health and wellness, there's an interrelation between them. And sometimes when we see that, it can help. Oh, well, I'm having cravings today because I had a bad night's sleep, whether it's because someone has a baby, their dog woke them up, loud noise, they suffer insomnia, whatever it may be, that's contributing to what's going on right now. And sometimes we can control those external factors, and other times we can't. So when my kiddos were little teeny tots and I was nursing them, well, I got up and I had to nurse them, and that impacted what I was doing the next day. And it's just like almost survival mode
Oh, I'm sure.
sometimes.
So really, like you're saying, like really getting in touch with like your body and kind of recognizing, okay, well, why am I having these cravings today? Or why am I especially ravenous? Or why am I just especially fatigued? Like maybe really trying to tap into maybe like why that is, digging deep in that connection, like with what your body's trying to tell you.
It is really digging deep. And also, I feel like taking the opportunity to assess, like, do I really feel like this? Or have I just been conditioned to want this? And this conditioning starts very young. Like, this is why there's companies, big, large companies, that are trying to get brand awareness to kids and youth, because they know if they drink that Coca-Cola or opposite Pepsi when they're really young, they're going to do that when they're adults, because there's so many unconscious decisions we make. It's just part of our everyday life. Like, this is how I've always done it,
Hmm.
rather than pausing it and being like, do I actually really enjoy this? And if I do really enjoy it, well, is it in alignment? Should I have it as much as they want to, and the amount of proportions? And there's some foods, for instance, for me, where it's like, I'm vegan-ish, I say, but I still try to reduce my sugar. But there's a cake, like a strawberry lemon cake, that I make every single summer. It's my once a year cake, and that thing's loaded with sugar. I'm not going to play with how much sugar it has, because it's once a year. My kiddos love it, but I also know I'm not making it every single week. And there was this, my dog. So my dog loves, we still have cheese in the fridge where my kids enjoy cheese right now, cheese and carrots. Now, if you feed her a carrot first, she'll eat her carrots. But if you feed her cheese first, she's not going to eat those carrots. And I
Wow.
think about that. She's like, no, no, that carrot doesn't do anything for me. I need
Yeah.
that cheese right now. And I think about that sometimes we're just so conditioned to, okay, eating out, which I used to eat out more, like fast food. And now I'm like, I don't even enjoy that food
Yeah.
at all. And when I have to go, I'm like, okay, like I went to McDonald's once, and I was just staring up at the menu thinking, okay, what am I going to have? Like looking at the menu, and then I got a drink, and no, I forget what I got. I said, that's your medium size? Like that, when I was growing up, that used to be like a small size. So there's all these different components. I feel like it's just plant-based is another way to live more consciously with
Yeah.
what we're doing, rather than just following what's always been done. And the way that I've reframed it, because I did have to change my family recipes, is that traditions started because once upon a time someone started something new, and it became
Ah.
this transition that sometimes we feel like we have to keep cooking those holiday meals or the birthday dinner meal the same exact way, because we've been doing it that way. But someone invented that somewhere once upon a time. So I talk with my kiddos a lot about that too. Like, let's respect the traditions, but really evaluate, do you enjoy them? Do they bring you pleasure? Do you want to try something a little bit different and see? And sometimes it works out really great, and other times, like, not ever doing that again. And other times in between, I'm going to tweak it a little bit next time.
Gosh, Beth, I'm going to use that and I'm going to reiterate that traditions had to start somewhere. Someone had to start a tradition somewhere along the lines. And like you're saying, it's kind of up to us to challenge if those are traditions that we want to continue with, or if we want to tweak them or not do them at all.
Exactly.
Yeah, I think that's really powerful. So, how was it for you? Kind of mentioned your hubby when you went plant based, and how was it for the kiddos? I mean, you're giving them autonomy, which I think is fantastic. But how was that kind of for your whole family as you're like, okay, this is what I'm doing, and how was that for everybody else?
was most challenging for him because he was cooking, especially when our kids were much younger. Now our kids are making their own meals, so not all the time, but sometimes. So it's a little bit easier, but they really have leaned into investigating more of if they want to continue in the past, what I'm doing, their own thing. So my older is now vegetarian. My younger, she isn't vegetarian, but tends to eat a little bit more on the clean side, does not really want much to do with cheese. All like cheese or yogurt, doesn't really like those, very limited portion of chicken and fish. And I just hope that I'm really setting an example to continue leaning into that and exploring what's going to be really beneficial for them. And they both have tapped into more of that. Well, how am I actually feeling? And that goes and will shape what they eat then in the future. And I always vary, whether it's workouts or eating, whatever strategy. It's not, oh, I work out in my basement, not, oh, I'm going to the basement because of what I just ate, or I need to go work out to lose weight, or I'm plant-based to lose weight. No, this is about overall health and wellness. And sometimes when we focus on that, it does translate to reduction of weight. Sometimes, depending upon how we train it, we're going to gain weight if we're building that strong muscle mass. And just allowing that flexibility, I think, is really helpful for our entire family to navigate food and so many other aspects.
Yeah, yeah. And I think that's such a beautiful example to set for your kids too, and for your YouTube channel and everyone following you, is that you're not doing this, like you said, to lose weight or to be a certain size. This is very intuitive to you and it's very joyful, which I really appreciate that. So, Beth, if you could go back and give yourself a piece of advice, I want you to go back to your 2012 self, because I'm sure there are people listening who maybe have tried going plant-based, or maybe they know someone who has tried it and it just didn't work. And of course, timing is everything. And when it's meant to be, it's meant to be. But if you could kind of go back and give yourself a piece of advice when you first went plant-based and it didn't quite work out, what would you say?
To try one recipe a month, even. And I mean, so 2012 to now, so different. Like we have Pinterest, we have Instagram sharing a recipe. And rather than just like endlessly scrolling and just getting all these ideas, we'll save it to a folder and say what one is going to be best for this month. And I do try to cook seasonally, and so that makes it easier as well. And just try and know that some ingredients are going to be really easy to find. Honestly, with nutritional yeast, I still can't find it in the store. Like the first time that I was to the store trying to find nutritional yeast for this recipe, luckily some person walked by, and because the person who worked there was like, I have no idea what you're talking about. I don't know where this is going to be. He goes, I know right where it is. Well, I usually don't do my grocery shopping. My husband does. And so when I went back to try to find it again, I had no idea where it was. So what did I do? I'm just ordering off Amazon now.
Yep.
It's so much easier, comes to my door. I mean, there's that whole component as well. There's meal services where you can try with plant-based, whether it's they're already prepped for you, or someone gave me like a recipe book because they were a member of a club where it was like they sent you the recipes each month. Whatever makes sense. I just know for me, if I follow someone else's meal plan, it's like it's too much and it's too new and it's so freaking overwhelming, because all of a sudden I have to do everything new. So one is to try one new recipe a month, and then two, what are the recipes that you are already doing and using and cooking and love, the simple swaps, right? Chicken stock, swap vegetable stock.
Yep.
If it calls for one egg, can you do some like flax meal? That's what I do, the flax meal with like 2 parts, I think it's like 2-to-1 ratio. It's like, I don't know it off the top of my head, but if I'm in my kitchen cooking, I can actually like just do it without extra ingredients. It's that like relationship. And that's how I've had recipes that I've really enjoyed in the past, and just I've adapted them. Like we have it's called a lazy fall casserole. It was so good. And for years, I just didn't cook it at all. But just recently, which was silly, just recently I was like, okay, well, why don't I just cook it? And rather than like the regular sausage, because that's the only thing in this whole recipe that was not plant-based. Potatoes and carrots and onions and all these other beautiful root vegetables, but then it had the meat in there. It's like, oh, well, I can just do like a plant-based meat instead, and it's actually faster to cook that way because I'm not having
Oh,
to
yeah.
also cook the meat. I could just throw in that sausage the last 15 minutes. So my encouragement would be just try something. And if it doesn't work, no problem. So many times people use it as that didn't work, so it's just not for me. Well, how
Mm.
many times have we tried any recipe or just a meal at a restaurant? We don't like it. And we don't think, oh, I'm just never going to eat meat again. I mean, that's silly. I mean, I know I don't eat meat right now again, but that's what people use as their supporting documentation that they can't do it because they tried one recipe or one meal that just wasn't really great. And so just blow it off. Okay, this is something else that you can think about. When you find things that you don't like and don't work, all it does is refocus you of what you're not going to focus on anymore and
Mhm.
refocus what is going to be maybe a better option next time.
Ooh, yeah. Yep.
Yeah.
Like, what can you choose next time to make sure that it's better for you? Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. Oh, that's all such great advice. I appreciate that, Beth. Well, Beth, thank you so much for coming on and sharing your story. And if people are interested in connecting with you or maybe doing some Pilates, where is the best place for them to find you?
I'm on Instagram, or you can find me on YouTube as well at Trifecta Pilates. And if you're more of a website person to check out all the little different components of what I do, trifectapilates.com.
Awesome. Wonderful. Yes, highly recommend at the very least going over to Beth's YouTube channel and watching some of her Pilates videos because they are incredible. And Beth does a marvelous
Yes.
job. Yeah.
And better than watching, moving.
There you go. Yes, much better. Yep.
Try one. And this is what I say for any workouts that you do, unless you hate it, try 3 times, whether it's the instructor, the movement modality, because maybe it's just that one class where the instructor was a little bit off, or like you're getting used to it, Pilates, or I know you're more of a CrossFitter. Just give it a try because we all have like days where maybe more in alignment. And let's face it, lots of Pilates is a little bit strange, and so we'll feel a little bit weird sometimes, but just embrace it. Let's have a little fun with it.
Yep. Beautiful. Wonderful. Well, we'll close it up there. Beth, thank you again for coming on and sharing your story.
Bye. Thanks so much for having me.
Until next time, keep thriving.